on Nova Legends podcast, I have former Oakton star Ned Gonet, who's spent the last 42 years winning state championships, educating young men down in Raleigh, North Carolina. Coach, great to meet you. Thanks for doing this.
Oh, good, Joe. And also good to meet you. Good opportunity to talk with you. Looking forward to it.
Oh, yeah, appreciate it. Well, Coach, the first thing it came to mind when I was going through your background is, as good as you played in high school and college, your team struggled. Yet as a coach, you did nothing but win. So as a coach, when you began to coach and you started as the head coach pretty quickly, it wasn't much of a apprenticeship here as an assistant. How were you able to turn maybe the mentality in your mind? I mean, obviously, as a running football's a team game, you can only do so much, but you're able to win and win and win. What was the difference as a coach as opposed to a player?
Well, I did receive a program that was pretty successful. Prior to me being there, they won 3 state championships in a row in 77, 78, 79. So they had been successful. Actually, it was 78, 79, 80. So, I was coming into a situation, there was an established foundation, a program, an expectation. Even though my first year in 1981, there was a tremendous graduation. So I was kind of starting over from scratch a little bit with some things. But I just kind of dug in and, put a lot of hard effort into it and work and try to apply what I did in my time and develop a mentality of a work ethic with these young people year round, whether it be in the weight room, whether it be on the track, and try to encourage them, support them. And slowly we built the program, established it again very quickly, that we actually returned to the state playoffs in 1982 and many times after that.
You sure did. Well, let me give folks your background. It's pretty incredible for folks who may have forgotten, since you went away from us a long time ago and never came back. For 42 years, you've coached at Ravenscroft in Raleigh, but you were a 76 graduate of Oakton, I believe, and 80 graduate of Duke. At Duke, you rushed for 885 yards, over 4 yards a carry. Played with two really familiar faces, Joel Patton, the Robinson guy, who I used to play basketball with a lot, and I knew his younger brother, and a Vienna legend named Bobby Brower, who one of the best looking athletes you ever see in terms of physique, and just a great baseball player and everything. So you played with him at Duke. You played for Mike McGee and Red Wilson at Duke. I forgot to mention at Oakton you played for Coach Williams. And then, as we were talking about before, you've won 5 state titles at Ravenscroft. You're in 3 Hall of Fames: the Ravenscroft Hall of Fame, the Oakton Hall of Fame. You were in the inaugural class of the Oakton Hall of Fame, and you're in the George Whitfield Hall of Fame, which is for contributions to North Carolina athletics. You coached your own sons, who are great athletes as well, Cole and Connor, at Ravenscroft, and you also coach NFL 3-time champion Antoine Harris who played there at Ravenscroft. Coach, did I get most of that correct?
Congratulations. It was pretty exact. There's a lot of history you reminded me of, but yeah, that's all pretty much right on track.
Well, it's pretty unbelievable. Well, before we get back to the Oakton days, what is the football culture in the Research Triangle? Now, we think of it as basketball country these days, just because how great Duke and North Carolina are, and also I can't forget to play NC State this year. But when you played at Duke, NC State and North Carolina were perennial powers in the ACC. Clemson was rising quickly, but it was probably football country back then as well as basketball country. What's the football culture like now in the Research Triangle?
Well, first of all, the ACC was a little different when I played. There was no Florida State, Miami, Syracuse. The prominent teams when I played were really Clemson and Maryland. They were the very relevant teams. Everybody had a pretty good program. Wake Forest was pretty competitive. Virginia, NC State from that. But now when they expanded the ACC and brought in teams even like Notre Dame, it's a pretty big part of it. Yeah, you're right. When you think about North Carolina, you think about basketball first, but I think the football in the ACC has improved dramatically over the last couple of years. Looking at the draft this year and years prior. By the way, Joel Patton was my roommate in college, and he's a scout and still is for the Carolina Panthers, and has been a scout for years.
Is that right?
He and I chat, pretty often, and he talks about the development of young people in the ACC and how they become more relevant as consideration for the NFL. Drake May, kid out of Charlotte, Carolina player, drafted and by the Patriots. So many of these kids are being taken. So I just think it's an opportunity. But also now with the transfer portal, it is a very challenging time in college athletics. And, you just wonder about the loyalty and ability to stay with the program throughout your tenure. We've been challenged with a lot of things over the past year. Not only that, but the COVID kind of put some different pressures on the college game and things of that nature. But I do think that the ACC with the expansion, let's see what happens with Florida State and Clemson. Are they really going to withdraw? Are they going to pull and go a different direction? A lot to be seen here in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Coach, I don't know if you've been back to the Oakton area lately, but it's really changed over the years. I mean, Oakton is a very high scale area, and I think probably when you were in school and I was in school, it was a little mix. It's probably some working class, some upscale areas, a little bit of everything. When did you guys first come to the Oakton area, and where did you guys live?
Well, I was born in the Pittsburgh area, actually in Rochester, PA, and my family moved down in the early 60s to Vienna. Vienna was a great little town back in the, about 55, 60 years ago. It was a great town, a small town, and they really supported athletics. From the fall when they had BY football, to the winter when they had BY basketball, and of course, baseball at Jonas Park. It was fantastic. It was a great support. A lot was built around the culture of Vienna, a lot of support down at Waters Field. And it was a good opportunity for young people to be able. I stepped in the game probably when I was 7, 8 years of age, playing in the football leagues and basketball and baseball, and was very fortunate to be coached by a lot of people. But as I continue to gravitate and work out the relationships and things, very unique difference in Virginia and North Carolina. Here they play middle school athletics, and up there when I was at Thoreau, they didn't have athletics. So you continued to stay in the rec teams up until you went to high school. So when I was leaving Thoreau as an 8th grader, some Fairfax County administrator came in and told us, okay, here's your next step. And when he went around the room and said, Ned Gonet, you'll be going to Oakton. I said, whoa, wait a second. My brother and sister went to Madison. All my friends go to Madison. That's got to be a mistake. I said, no, you've been redistricted and rezoned. You and Danny Ramsey, who was a good buddy of mine, a catcher, you all going to Oakton. Well, I accepted that challenge. We went down there. And what was very unique about that, you might not even remember that, but Chantilly High School had yet to open. They were delayed. And their young people in the freshman class all came to Oakton and joined us as a freshman class, which made us pretty powerful. We had a very powerful freshman football team really throughout all of our sports. And I thought, wow, this is going to maybe work out pretty well. We'll play the guys across the street, a couple times a year. But now, unfortunately, after my freshman year, Chantilly opened up and they returned. So, we had some pretty good teams. I was coached by some really great people, Jim Williams, Tom Hall, Doug Carper, over through the days. I was able to play 3 sports and I enjoyed the experience. Same time, it was very much supported because Madison, Marshall, and Oakton were very close. We had different conferences back then, Langley, McLean. I'm sure that's all changed. And yes, I do return because I still have family in that area. And I'm amazed at the amount of high schools. They just renovated Oakton. It was really remarkable. I think it took them 3 or 4 years, but they've kind of remade that whole school. It's a big, powerful school with great facilities, tremendous athletic facilities. So the whole program, the whole town has grown, and they continue to do a great job of supporting, their high school athletics, which I think is great.
Yeah. Well, Coach, when I talk to athletes in your era, Mark Cox, Todd Kirtley, some of the guys, I'm sure these names are ringing a bell to you. They were guys who would talk about how if you beat us in football, we're going to get you back in basketball. If you beat us in basketball, we're going to get you back in baseball. Were you one of those guys who played all 3 sports as well?
Yeah, I'm not sure I had that. We're going to get you back. I played. I enjoyed our teammates. We tried to be the best we could be. We never were a powerhouse, but we were competitive. Mm-hmm. And, I think there was a rivalry, mostly a Madison rivalry because we all played together and grew up together. Marshall was kind of a rivalry a little bit further away from us. I was up around the Thoreau area where everybody else was more in the town of Vienna. So the Dunlorian people that were in Marshall, I was kind of between them all. Yeah, but I think there was some rivalries. I mean, particularly, we were kind of right there on that. Remember the Titans era? We were coming out of there, T.C. Williams. Fortunately, uniquely, first school I actually worked at was at Robinson High School for Ed Henry. Oh. My brother-in-law was working at Robinson as an educator and football coach. And, when I had a little opportunity to try the NFL, I got released. And that was my first job in the fall of 1981, was working for Ed Henry. Wow. It was a great experience with a tremendous coach with a big program. That kind of launched my coaching ambitions. I kind of got the energy for it and then went to a different direction when I moved down here. So there was a lot of people very critical in the process. Unfortunately, a lot of those people that are no longer with us. But I was very, very appreciative of the job they do laying laying the foundation for my future.
Yeah, I was a neighbor of Coach Henry and friends with his daughter, and I played a little football. Robinson, he was such a great man. Now you mentioned remember the Titans. Now when you were in school, it was kind of the post Vietnam years. Was high school was it like a tumultuous time in high school, or were those years behind us? Were those days of the protests and stuff kind of behind us by the time you were in high school?
You know, it's interesting because I played with a lot of guys at Duke from TC Williams, and I wasn't quite in that era, but you could still feel the vibrations when you went over there played. You know, a lot of those things on that film were interesting. Some of them were theatric. Some of them were pretty true. If I remember right, they didn't really play many night games, and they had a lot of spirit. And you know, you always had to sort of be aware of situations, and there was a lot of, you know, turmoil and things in our society at that point in time. But they always had a good football team. They were very athletic. They were very competitive. I always appreciate, you know, playing them. And ironically, I had Herman Boone come down and speak to my team in 1994. It was kind of really interesting. He joined and came down here and did a great job. He remembered playing against me and Coach William and Oakton. So kind of had a little relationship with the Titans. And, you know, I think it was a good transitional time in our community and our society at that time, as far as diversification, things like that. And I played, interestingly, when I was in college, I played against Ronnie Bass, who was a quarterback at South Carolina. And an interesting thing, his teammate, Cook, that played for us, we played South Carolina, we're down 21-0 at halftime. We ended up beating them 22-21. And Earl Cook intercepted Ronnie Bass at the end of the game to stop the game. Very ironic, two Titan teammates in a situation. But anyways, it was a good experience. It was competition, and that's what I always enjoyed.
Yeah, it's a great time. Well, Coach, it was a golden years of football. Football had taken over from baseball in the early 70s as a national pastime. Vince Lombardi was here briefly, and then you were in high school. It was the George Allen years, and we had Billy Kilmer, Sonny Jurgensen, Larry Brown, Tyrone Talbert, Harold McClinton. We had all those legendary names, Brig Owens. Do you remember that golden era of pro football?
Sure, I remember that. Of course, I remember the Steelers too, because, you know, again, having come from there, I sort of had a lot of ambition to watching them proceed. But, you know, the whole crowd from, you know, Sonny Jurgensen to Kilmer to Theismann to John Riggins, you know, I kind of portrayed myself after him as being a rugged fullback the best I could be. But those were golden years. I mean, couldn't wait for the games to come on and watch them and you know, be involved in their legacies, which, of course, those two teams were very instrumental during that era. They were very successful in their chasing Super Bowl titles. So, yeah, it was very much a golden era.
Yeah. Coach, who was the first important coach you had in your career?
My dad.
Oh.
Yeah, that's a tough one because he was an athlete in his time. He went to Grove City College up in Pennsylvania. I mean, you know, he knew we had an interest in it, my brother and I, and whether we went out and hit baseballs or punted footballs, whatever it was, he was very skilled. I could tell he was an athlete in his day. And he always took us up there and worked on the skill level. So he was my original coach. He coached me in Little League and youth sports, but he was more determined to turn me over to other people when I got into high school. So he became a great fan and, you know, made me occasionally constructively criticize my game. But most of the time, he was very encouraging, no different than my mom. My mom was one of the first women really involved in local sports with Vienna Little League. She was a president, very involved in trying to encourage, you know, the growth of the program and develop Jonas Park and things like that. But I had great coaches, as I mentioned before, my high school coaches, all the way from freshman to senior year. I went to Duke because I really liked Mike McGee's philosophy. He was a tough guy, blue collar guy. Tom DeArmai was my baseball coach. He came from Mississippi State at Duke, and he was an incredible coach. We had a great relationship. So I think I've been very, very fortunate to have people that have helped me mentor. And that's what I try to be to the kids I coach these days. I try to arm them with tools. You're going to win games. You're going to remember them. But to arm them with the tools to be successful in life. Time management, discipline, teamwork. Be a good husband. Be a good father. Whatever it might be. Be a good employee. And I think that's really the end game here when kids transition out of high school, college athletics, is now to set the foundation for their future. And I've had a lot of young people, and that's what I enjoy. Remember, I also coached girls basketball, which was interesting, by the way.
Yeah.
When I coached that, I got into that in a very odd way. But we've developed one of the best basketball teams in the state. I've taken 13 teams to state finals and won 8 in those 3 sports. So I've been very fortunate to have success in all 3, but it came by out-of-season work. I always tell the kids, you're not going to get better during the season. What are you going to do after? whether it be basketball, lifting weights, getting faster. You know, doing this whole football, it's about speed. You either have it or you're chasing it. When you're
Yeah.
chasing, you're not going to have much success. So we really try to get quicker, faster, stronger. Girls in basketball, which I think is a pretty simplistic sport, learn to run, jump, finish your layups, get the turnovers. In baseball, to me, that's a different sport. That's an innate talent that's hard to come by, trying to hit an 80-yard, 80-mile-an-hour fastball. So we were fortunate to have some teams that were really good too. But I'm just trying to develop the fundamentals for the kids to be successful.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Coach Williams as your coach at Oakton, and even though the record wasn't great, you said you learned from him. What are some of the things you learned from Coach Williams that you use in your coaching? Is that just about being a good player, good husband, good teammate, or is there more to that with Coach Williams?
First of all, I'd be remiss to say my first coach, Bill Edmondson. He was the first coach I had when I was younger. And then Mr. Williams took over after him, Coach Williams. I just think he developed a relationship with the people. You know, we had well over 100 guys on the football team, which is a lot different than I have here. And I think he kind of found a rhythm to try to motivate the young people and try to encourage them. And, you know, we played against a lot of town teams. I see where, unfortunately, Eric Sievers passed away a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
WNL. Of course, I played against him at Maryland. He had a great, you know, NFL career. But there was a lot of players like Eric that we played against, and the teams were pretty good, whether it was Herndon, McLean. I always thought our coaches prepared us well. Tom Hall was a baseball coach, but he also coached football. So those relations were interdepartmental throughout the school. And obviously, they also put emphasis on academics. You can't launch yourself unless you get a good foundation academically. Do the work, be a good athlete, be respectful, learn how to win with modesty, handle losses in a proper manner. Those are the things I try to carry on to this day with the young people I coach.
Yeah. Well, Coach, some of your successful teammates in high school, the ones that made all district, were Thor Kritzky, Nick Paulette, and Eddie Whitney. You remember those guys and you remember playing with those guys?
Sure, I do. I think Eddie Whitney passed away, I believe. I hate to hear that, but I heard he did. You know, once I moved out of Vienna, which to be honest with you, Mayor, you know, I've been gone since 1981. So my relationship with a lot of those people isn't quite intact as much. Chris Yost is probably my longest friend that I played basketball with. He played, you know, basketball. He's 6'8", he's a great basketball player. But, you know, some of those relationships were hard to keep because we all went different directions, went to different places geographically, you know, got married, had kids, relocated. But all those people you mentioned were very, very critical to my success. If I didn't have teammates like that, and have people who were committed to the process, I wouldn't probably had some of the success I was fortunately able to experience.
Yeah. Well, Coach, you mentioned you went to Duke. One of the reasons why was because of Mike McGee. What was Duke like in those days? I mean, when I go to Duke, it's such a beautiful campus, but it's very classic. My guess is it probably looked a lot the same back then as it does now. But what were your first impressions of Duke, and how much has it changed over the years?
Well, you know, first of all, coming out of high school, I was fortunate enough to have a couple colleges interested in me. And Duke, Virginia, Maryland, Jerry Claiborne, Bill Dooley, Richmond. But one of the things was a difference maker that I was interested in playing football and baseball. And some of those coaches were not interested in me having to do that. But Duke was very receptive to it because Duke was not a fully funded baseball program at the time. So they relied on people like Jim Spanarkel, basketball, and guys from the football program.
He played baseball, Spanarkel. I didn't know
that.
that.
He was a pitcher. Jim Spanarkel was a heck of a pitcher. And Larry Doby, and we had a lot of football players. But the unique thing is that Tom Butters, who was the AD at that time, said to Coach McGee, "You got to help us out here. You got to let them play in the spring. We got to have a competitive baseball team." He wasn't happy about that, by the way, but he said, "Okay, but they got to do both." And the truthfully is, there was times where I would play a doubleheader and have to run to football practice and do stuff. But Duke was kind of a blue collar place and very academic, had a great reputation, had the success with Bill Foster and Krzyzewski coming in the early 80s. But all the programs were relevant. They didn't really have lacrosse at that point. They didn't start to develop. But across the board, all their programs, you know, they were competitive. I wouldn't say they were a national prominence. You know, you had Stanford, Notre Dame, and Duke, I think, are three nationally known programs. And but I think, you know, with every program, you're going to get a good effort against them, give you the best, a lot of heart. I think the coaches had the same mindset. Let's play hard. Let's give it all we have. Let's prepare. Different rules back in those days. You could practice 3 days, 3 hours a day, more. So Coach McGee was a hard nose. He was a blue collar, but he was exactly the type of guy I enjoyed playing with. That's a little bit how I coached when I was younger.
Yeah. What was Bobby Brower like? He played in the major leagues. as I was saying before, he's quite the physical specimen. I've heard legend of him. I don't remember watching him play. But what was Bobby like?
I think a little bit Bobby was at Duke. Maybe I was a little bit responsible for that because he's a hometown boy. And I knew him since he was young. I knew his family. And again, he wanted to play football and baseball, so his options became minimal. Bobby was an incredible athlete. He had a great takeoff, kind of galloped like a deer. He could run.
Yeah.
He and I were at the same backfield many times as a fullback and tailback, and he just had explosiveness. I mean, he could get to the second level quick, make a cut quick. He could cut the grain, and he had good vision. But that's what made him, he stopped playing football, if I remember right, at the end of his career and committed, dedicated himself to baseball. He had a great relationship with Coach DeArmai. And in center field, I mean, he could cover foul line to foul line. I think the most humorous thing to me was he was on second, there was a pass ball. He was going to score on that pass ball from second base. He could really go. And he also developed to be a better hitter. He got more consistent. His arm got stronger. That's why he had some success with both, I believe, the Rangers and the Yankees in his career.
Yeah. Well, Coach, you go to Duke, the team struggles a bit. What do you think about today? Players today, they go to schools, if they're not really happy, they go to the next one. They transfer quickly. When you went to school, you signed up. Generally, if you spent your 4 years there, you did the best you could, and afterwards you either went to the next level or, like most people, you went to work. What do you think about today's environment where athletes go to a place and they may not stay very long?
Julian, you're going to get me on my soapbox now.
It's okay.
I think it's a really challenging time. The transfer portal and the NIL has put a real challenge on high school coaches. And I understand why. I used to have probably 6, 7 coaches come through my office a week recruiting our kids. But with the pressure on college coaches and the money that's being paid, they're expected to win. And the transfer portal has become a big part of it. And if they can find somebody now that's willing to transfer after 2 years, played 30 games to some schools, put on 35 pounds, been in nutritional programs, strength program, and they can play now, they're going to give consideration over a high school kid who hasn't developed yet. And I get that, but it does put pressure on us as high school coaches because there's no outlet for some of these kids to be able to follow their dreams. I've had a good handful of kids the last 5 or 6 years I thought could play at a higher level, but the schools have gone and found kids that they can count on now, and I understand that. And then the lack of loyalty. I personally don't understand when people step out of playing bowl games. I think there's a loyalty to your teammates. And then if you look in the room and you're one of the 6 quarterbacks, ain't but one quarterback, you better find somewhere else to play because, you're probably not going to get on the field. So, preferred walk-ons, PWOs are becoming more and more because of roster limits, transfer portal, the NIL. There's a lot of pressures today. And I think that's a lot of reason why some of these older coaches might be getting out because that's the question being asked. How much am I going to play? Am I going to start? How much are you going to pay me? That's a hard time to deal with. It's not pure athletics sometimes, even though I've always thought college athletics were great. There's a lot of different pressures now they're dealing with.
Yeah. Well, Coach, you're talking about pressure with coaches. You went to Duke to play for Mike McGee. You ended up playing for Red Wilson your last year. Whenever there's a coaching change, it can be tough on players because, again, that's one of the reasons why you came to Duke, and you're all in by the time Coach Wilson is there. What was that transition like? Is it tough on players when that happens?
Really interesting you asked that question. My last game our junior year was against Carolina, and they came back and beat us really a crazy way. And the next morning, I heard on the news that they had let Coach McGee gone. He was gone. They had let him go. And I was really taken back. This is a guy I came to school for. I had a great relationship. I think we had a mutual respect for each other. Red Wilson was actually on staff, so they promoted him to head coach. And he brought in a new staff. And ironically, one of the things they do is change the offensive philosophy. Now, remember, in the spring of 1979, I was playing baseball, but he changed the offense completely. And what they did is they took all the fullbacks and put them on defense, trying to ramp up defense, and went to the veer. So that means they used tailbacks instead of fullbacks. We had good quarterbacks in Mike Dunn and Stanley Driscoll. So I'm battling for position on defense. I really never played, even though I hit linebackers all my life, I never played linebacker. So I was trying to win a position on defense, play baseball, and try to impress the coaches as a rising senior who was a 3-year starter throughout the program. It was a battle, but I did finally secure a position and started as outside strong linebacker against East Carolina, Tennessee, I believe Virginia and Michigan. And then 4 games in the season, all those running backs got hurt. So I had to go back to offense. They went back to the eye, And I played for a couple games both ways. It was kind of unprecedented because I was calling the defenses. So we did that for a couple times, but the transition was a little challenging. You know, Mike McGee, as I said, was a trench fighter. He was a hard nose, you know, expectations. Red Wilson was a great guy. He was a promoter, very different personality. So the ones that had been there had to deal with the transition of the environment, the atmosphere, the recruits coming in. So the transitional years were a little difficult, particularly our senior year with that big transition for multiple reasons. But again, you know, I respected what they tried to do. We still showed up, didn't have a great record. And at that time, Duke was playing national games because I think it was probably a money game. We were playing Southern Cal, my freshman year, Michigan. You know, we were playing games that were going to pay dividends because there was not much TV back then. The bowl games were minimal.
Yeah, Coach, when you have these coaches that have, you know, losing records and there's pressure on them, do you think sometimes it's unfair? And these are really good coaches; they need to be in the right circumstance. Like, you know, for example, Bill Parcells had a couple losing seasons before he turned around and became one of the best coaches in the history of pro football. Do you think coaches like Coach McGee and Coach Williams, just because you're losing doesn't mean you can't be a great coach?
Oh, no doubt about it. I think you got to look past, you know, your coaches. It depends on the talent you have, particularly in high school, because you don't typically recruit. Even though we're a private school, we get different types of kids from different boundaries. But I think when you take a look, you want to be able to, you know, be played for a coach that has tremendous morals, character, has the you know, expectations to help you in your journey, both academically, structurally, you know, emotionally. Today's a different time. You know, we have an assistant athletic director in charge of mental health, trying to help the kids with, you know, successes and failures and academics and home life. It's a different time. Back in those days, you were expected to strap it up and play. You know, rub a little dirt on it, take a couple salt pills, let's play hard. This is a different time and place, and you got to be really careful with risk management. We have 3 athletic trainers on staff. I defer to them for all injuries, making sure our kids are safe, traveling. Everybody's got a camera, everybody's filming things. So it's really a different time it was back in the 70s and 80s. But I think a coach can be very relevant in a young person's life. Some of the great relationships I have, you know, some of the guys I coached when I first came here are nearing 60 years old. And when my last game I coached back in the fall 2022, most of them came back. Some of them I couldn't even remember their names. But to listen to stories like, hey, you know, you were tough on us, your expectations, but I've used that in my life. I've used it as a discipline with my family, with my kids, with my work. That means a lot to me to know, okay, I had an impact. They heard me. They might not listen to me, but they heard me. But they've used it in their personal life to have some successes. That means a lot to me. That's the same thing I experienced with my coaches.
Yeah. Well, the coaches are lucky to have you behind them, supporting them. So, Coach, you mentioned that you coached briefly with the great Ed Henry at Robinson up in Fairfax. How'd you end up at Ravenscroft?
So, in the fall of 19, I think here, the fall of 1980, I had a little opportunity with the 49ers and Giants. Didn't last long. I got released and headed back to Vienna, and that's when I took the job at Robinson. And early in 1981, my baseball coach and I had a good relationship. He encouraged me to come down and get involved in Duke athletics in general. So I did. And at that time, Red Wilson said, I'd really like to have a Duke, you know, guy on my staff. And this is interesting. He said, I think the NCAA is going to expand staffs, and we might be able to find a position for you, maybe as a running back coach or something. Come on down. So I went down with my baseball coach, worked in the athletic departments, kind of different departments. Not only did NCAA not expand, they cut back a staff member. So I was sort of kind of left out. But Tom Butters, the AD, and Tom Brown said, stay with us. Now work with us, work with Coach DeArmai, help them with recruiting, which we did. We traveled all over East Coast, up to Hall of Fame, Cooperstown, just recruiting spring. And about May of that time, the head of school at Ravenscroft called Mr. Butters up and said, our football coach left very abruptly. We need to find somebody. We won 3 state championships. Our parents were determined. Mr. Butters recommended me, so he called me in the office and said, listen, got an opportunity for you. He told me where he was. I said, I never heard of the school. Remember, it's only 30 miles away, but it was in Raleigh and Durham. He said, well, I know a lot about it because my son goes to private school in Asheville. Just why don't you drop by there and, you know, let go through the interview, which I did. I went in there, there was a little committee. And I thought, you know, they're not going to hire me. I'm 22, 23 years of age. You know, my predecessors were a lot older guys, a lot of experience. So I appreciate it. It's a great, you know, it's a great environment, big campus, probably different now than it was back then. So I went back, headed to DC. I went back home to see my family in Dr. Grover Smith had called and left a message with my dad, said, have him call me. And I did. And he said, we'd like to talk to you again. I went back. They offered me a job to be athletic director, head football, and head baseball coach. Went back to Mr. Butters and Coach Yarmine and said, we can't give you that type of experience. That's going to be great. Go over there. We'll bring you back 5 or 6 years. We'll get you back involved in Duke, which many times there was opportunities I didn't take. That's how I got to Ravenscroft, was through a connection with our president, Dr. Grover Smith, who's passed away, to Mr. Butters and Coach Yarmine, and they made the recommendation based on probably my relationship and experience with them and my time at Duke.
Yeah. Well, Coach, I know you're still the AD today, even though you're not coaching football. How long did you coach baseball?
Yeah, I coached baseball. It's interesting. I was in and out. I was determined. My 2 sons came to play for me. I kind of stepped away. So really, I basically coached baseball almost probably 30 years.
Is that right?
Probably girls basketball around 20. And, you know, I used to have a different office with all these plaques where I could count them. I can't really remember, but it's close to that. And I kind of got in and out of baseball a couple of times by people that succeeded me. Either they couldn't commit the time, the dedication, things like that. And, you know, baseball was, I enjoyed it. That was kind of my passion anyways, even though football was really my end game at some points. But I ended up going back and coaching 2 of my sons late in their career in baseball, of course, coached them in football throughout their career here. So those are the years. So I did, you know, I was an AD coaching 3 major sports. We travel a lot. You know, we don't play locally here. We travel to Greensboro, to Charlotte. All of our competition comes out of the western part of the state. So it kept me on the road a lot in those years, up and down I-40, 95, 85. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the experience, you know, 12 months a year.
Yeah, I haven't talked to many coaches that have coached 3 sports. I guess you've coached 4. You've coached 3 sports. Do you consider the skill sets very, very similar, or as a good football coach much different than a good basketball coach and a good baseball coach? Or do you think once you learn the technical aspects of each, a good coach is a good coach?
You know, I'm in the interviewing process right now. We have plenty of jobs available here at Ravenscroft. You know, we're kind of like a college. We have obviously faculty, staff development, alumni, business office. We have a lot of opportunities here. So I've been interviewing, hopefully, potential people to be coaches. And I just ask them what they think a good coach is, no matter what sport it is. It really goes back to, first of all, the knowledge of the sport they're coaching, the understanding of fundamentals, how to employ them within their team, the patience to be able to accept the talent levels they have and develop that, and then a knowledge of how to operate a game, the adjustments you make at halftime. You know, I've coached against some pretty sharp coaches in my time, and you can see their ability to watch film, have a game plan, which we did here, because football is a 7-day-a-week thing, from obviously about May till how far you go. When we were going to state championships to Thanksgiving, and we were working, you know, 25, 30 hours a week. But, you know, you can tell when you get up against a sharp coach that really has developed his team and has the ability to motivate, to encourage. Maybe the best teams that I had, it was the teams that we were not very talented, but we overachieved. We showed up every day, committed ourselves to the process. We accepted the coaching. And those are the things I think I look for in a coach, the things I expect out of. I got over 100 coaches here on my staff that I expect out of each and every one of them.
Is it also a different challenge? Like, for example, if you coach at Oakton or Robinson, you know, you're going to have lots of kids, lots of athletes, and you're going to have some options in terms of where you put kids. My guess is I've seen your roster of graduates at Ravenscroft. You've got 3 NBA players, you've got an NFL player, so you get very talented kids. But obviously, you're not going to have the depth of players, so you got to find kids to put around the talented kids that you have. So my guess is it's a very different task than coaching at Oakton High School, isn't it?
You know, that's a tremendous question you asked, because to be honest with you, the first day I showed up here for practice, I was shocked. I just came from Robinson with 100-some kids, played at Oakton. We had less than 20 kids show up the first day off a team that just won state championship.
Wow.
And there was a big graduation. I thought, what in the world's going on here? And eventually, so in the private school business, you know, 35 to 45 kids on a roster is typical. Probably going to have close to 90 in your program with a feeder program. But the key thing I think that I became pretty good at was trying to find a way to find, if you couldn't win a job as a quarterback or receiver, where could we plug you in with your athleticism to contribute? And we had a lot of two-way players. I've also been blessed with some pretty talented kids. I mean, one team I had back in 94, 95, I think I had 7 Division I kids on that team, including Antoine Harris. you get a player like once in a lifetime, like Antoine, 8 years in the NFL. He actually played for me as a young ninth and eighth grader because of his size and his age. And he was one of those young people that you could develop a sweep. He was going to take it to the house about 3 out of 10 times. He just had incredible vision, speed, and competitiveness. So he was, and to this day, we have a great relationship. And he's one of those young people that's a tremendous businessman, a great father. I feel very proud of him. He and I were just together this past weekend. But I think one of the keys when you're coaching at a school like this with limited rosters, be able to motivate, encourage, and get the support of your kids being willing to try something different. If you can't play tight end, you're willing to play tackle. If you can't play receiver, you're willing to play defensive back. And if they're, typically they're pretty flexible. They understand they just want to get on the field. Occasionally you'll run in a situation where they say, no, that's not really my end game, my passion. But typically they're very, very willing to do it. So you have to change your mindset a little bit in football that takes depth, and it does. And sometimes we've run into problems with injuries. That's a big issue sometimes. But most of the times, from start to finish, we've stayed competitive. We figured a way to adjust teams and put people in a position to succeed.
Yeah. Well, Coach, when I was in high school, Chris Warren, who was a Hall of Fame nominee NFL, he was a year behind me. I played basketball with Chris, and he as a sophomore, he played JV. That's how stacked Robinson was. We had a guy named Tommy Osborne who played for North Carolina. We just had so much talent. So Coach Henry told me when he was on JV that Chris Warren would be in the NFL one day. Chris and I were friends, and I was just like, "What is he talking about? He's on JV." And of course, he was right. Was there something about Antoine Harris? There's a lot of great athletes that you've been around and you've played against and with. Did you know right away this kid was an NFL player? That something about him was different?
You know how Antoine got to Ravenscroft? I refereed basketball for a long time, high school basketball. And I was happened to ref a rec game for some reason. He was like maybe 12 or 13. And I just was watching his motor skills and play basketball. And I watched how he interacted with the other kids on the court, how he supported them. And I obviously saw his speed and his quickness. He obviously was only about 12 or 13 then. I also saw who was sort of involved with his life. He had a grandmother and a mother. So I went over to him. We talked a little bit and asked him as he was transitioning from 8th to 9th, what his next school was. And he was a public school guy. And I said, did you ever think about Ravenscroft? They said, actually, we have. And make a long story short, they pursued it. And he came to Ravenscroft. And he was a 3-sport athlete also. Football was his big game. Pretty good basketball player, not great. In baseball, he was competitive. He was on first base. He was going to be on third because he was going to steal bases. So he was good at that. But I just could tell by his work ethic, his determination. This will sound funny to you, but one of the things I noticed was in our locker room, we have a pretty nice locker room. His locker was always immaculate. His helmet was there, his shoulder pads were, his shoes were shined, but that was the discipline of his life. He was impeccably dressed. He was always groomed. He was always respectful. Yes, sir. No, sir. He was always mannerly. He always respected his teammates. The maddest I got about him one time was in 1995. We're playing a state championship game. He breaks loose on a 75-yard touchdown. He gets to the 5-yard line. He turns around and hands the ball to his lineman so they could get the credit. Of course, we almost got penalized for it for whatever. I said, what are you doing? He said, I wanted them to have the glory because that's why I'm in the end zone. That's the mentality he has even to this day. He has 3 children. He's supporting them. He supports his family, his grandmother. So I saw the innate ability of his intangibles, his work ethic, let alone his skills. I mean, man, he was just a joy to watch play. And you knew as a coach, when you called his number, hit the tee, we're ready to kick an extra point. He's going to take it to the house. And it was very enjoyable. To this day, we have a great relationship. I feel like he's almost my son. And we have that relationship sort of.
Well, that's great, Coach. Well, one thing that doesn't add up is, so I talked to Anna Prilliman, and Anna is the AD at Trinity outside of Richmond. And she told me, just interviewed her 2 weeks ago. She was a star basketball player at UVA, and she was just telling me how incredibly taxing being AD is at a private school. I would think it wouldn't be a small school, wouldn't be that bad. She said you got all these fields, you got parents, you got everything. It's just nonsense. It's just an unbelievable job. So how are you able to be an AD, a basketball coach, a football coach, a baseball coach, and also officiate I was
Yeah.
official. That was a very time intensive thing as well, and raised at least 2 kids that we've talked about. How are you able to do all that?
Well, first of all, I'm fortunate enough, I have a pretty big staff. Okay, so, you know, having some experience and everything, because I was handed the keys at that young age and didn't know, I mean, just the campus was empty. Ravenscroft's a pretty big school. I mean, you got 220 acres. We were 750 students. Now we're like 1,300 students. So, and we had about every program. Back when we started, we didn't have lacrosse. We didn't have field hockey. We didn't have indoor outdoor track. So we have, and 87% of our kids participate in athletics from 7th grade up. But I've also worked for 6 head of schools. I'm actually getting ready to go through another transition, which have all been great people. I remember one of the head of schools said to me one time, there's 2 people that are really important on a campus at private school. The head of school, obviously, but also is the AD. And I said, why do you say that? He said, well, you're interacting with so many factions of people. You're dealing with so many situations when they have to cut kids, playing time, coaches, travel. There's a lot of things you have to deal with the day after, the night after, altercations and things like that. I found that to be true. So you have to be willing to almost be on call 24 hours a day. You got to be willing to be patient, talk to people, encourage them to come see you, because everybody has something perspective on how things should be done differently. So what I try to do, to be honest with you, Julian, is run a very consistent program to stay balanced with equity, male and female, which is a big thing these days, male and female sports, making sure you're giving them both the resources. And I always try to feel with some consistency. There are major sports, football, lacrosse, track, they demand more kids, more travel, more uniforms, more equipment. But I don't think anybody at this school goes without what they need. We're fortunate enough we have the resources. We have fantastic facilities. We've got 4 gyms, 2 wrestling rooms. We just renovated our weight room, our conditioning room. So they have the best of the world here. So there shouldn't be any reasons for that. So I just balanced it. I'm fortunate. I have 5 assistant athletic directors who all have a different thing they do, from compliance to handbooks, to operations to facilities, officials. There's a lot of different things. I enjoyed refereeing basketball. I had to get out of it. The interesting story behind that was I had both the boys' job open and the girls' job. I hired Morgan Wooten's assistant out at the math with Pete Strickland. He
Oh, I
came
know
and took the
Strick.
boys' job. I was hiring a girl from North Carolina that worked for the airline industry. And 30 minutes before I was going to introduce her to the people, she called and told me her job changed. I went in the room and shut the door, and they're all looking around me. And I said, I'm going to introduce a new coach. And they said, great, who is it? I said, me. Now, they weren't very crazy about that. They said, wait a second. That being said, as I mentioned, we developed a pretty good program. But I had to get out of refereeing and just transition. Back in the day, there was a start and stop. You played baseball, June, July, August, and it stopped. Football, August, September, October, maybe November. Basketball. There's just some overplays now that makes it tougher. Then there's your year-round programs that challenges. There used to be everybody wanted to put on the colors of the high school, play for your high school team. Now there's a great emphasis of playing for year-round soccer programs, field hockey programs. Play for us. We're going to lead you to where you want to be. And I just don't understand why people do that, but I understand the commitment and dedication for the resources they invest. So there's challenges for ADs, there's challenges for coaches, but I hope it's the biggest thing. When people come to Ravenscroft, they know they're going to be treated right. We're going to take care of them. We're going to take care of their athletes. And when we travel, we're going to show up. We're going to represent. We're going to look right. And we're going to play as hard as we can play, win, lose, or draw.
Well, Coach, one thing is you look very young, so you've taken great care of yourself. When I talk to people, their high school coach was usually the biggest influence on their life. If I ask them who's the most important role model you had, they'll always almost point to a high school coach. But as you know, so many coaches get out of the game, probably in the mid to late 40s is when they start getting out of the game. Basically, they're not compensated anymore to coach. So it becomes hard. They can retire from teaching as well. And financially, it's hard for people to coach after a certain. So we lose all these great leaders and all the effect they've had on these kids. We lose all those possibilities. And I guess you can argue that maybe other guys get a chance to step in, but that's not always happening these days. People aren't getting into coaching like they were when you were young. What do you think about that? What can we do to keep coaches in the game a long time like yourself? Are there things that we can do to make coaches want to stick around? And because I'm sure your competitive juices were probably still flowing two years ago when you were coaching.
First of all, I appreciate you telling me I look young, but I've also had about everything replaced in my body in the last 8 years.
Sorry
So,
about that. Yeah.
anyways, you know, it's a good question you asked, and I'm gonna tell you something. First of all, look at the public school mechanism. Mostly, let's take a young person graduating from college, 22, 23, and they get a job in the public school sector, right? 30 years, they're 52, 53, 54 years of age. They're probably better off to retire. Their benefits, from what I understand, is a lot better by retiring. They're not making any more, any less, and they're getting all kind of benefits to retire. So, you know, they get out of the game early in their 50s. You know, I get a lot of calls from public school guys trying to double dip. Hey, you got a job for me in a private school and pay me a stipend to do all that. You know, my basketball coach is Kevin Bellerman. He played basketball at Duke, two-time captain there. He's touching 70 years old. He used to work here. He retired. He's from New Jersey. He was an All-American basketball and football player. Like I say, he played basketball at Duke. And but he just does it because he enjoys it. He enjoys the kids. He enjoys it as a hobby. And I guess we all figure out when you decide to hang it up and you retire, what are you going to do? What is your end game? You know, I'm fortunate enough to have a grandchild, one on the way, 2 kids in the area. So family's big to me. Hopefully we can spend some time together. But, you know, extracurricularly, there's not much I can do anymore physically other than try to play a little golf, which is not always successful. But, you know, I think that when you look at the next wave of coaches, my concern is we are getting people that really have not played the game as much. They maybe have dipped their toe into playing a little soccer, played Madden football on TV. They have aspiration and passion to play it. But again, going back to what I said before, how much do they really understand the game, technique of the game, making changes and altering things and putting people in position, calling plays on the sideline, making adjustments, you know, developing a routine or strategy. If they hadn't done it themselves or been exposed to it, that's a challenge. And I've seen a lot of our coaches, they have a lot of heart, got a lot of experience, but that's a little part that's missing. When it really gets tough and they get up against another competitor, are they willing to match wits with that person? And I think if they hadn't played the game, if they haven't been in the trenches, it is a challenge and it's hard. I just think, and the other thing, just in this, you know, they don't get paid a whole lot of money for doing this. It's really, I tell my football coach all the time, don't put hourly wages to this because you're probably making $1 an hour. Do it for the love of the game, for the passion, enjoying the kids at the end of the day. But then you look at the wrath you get from the parents, and what didn't you play my kid? Why didn't he get a scholarship? I don't like your style. A lot of people say, I don't need all that. I mean, I can go tutor, I can go do driver's ed, or I can teach somebody to do something, you know, something different. So I think there's a lot of that going on in our community that you see that discourages people to get into business because it takes time. It takes time to coach.
Yeah. Coach, you spend a lot of your time mentoring coaches and teaching them things. Like when you see, you've been through so many situations because you've coached so many different sports and you've won so many titles and you've touched so many lives. Do you find yourself mentoring coaches and say, look, I wouldn't handle it that way. I wouldn't do it this way. Or do you kind of just stand back and just give them the logistical support that they need?
Well, internally, I feel like I mentor a lot of our people, our staff, our coaches. They'll run into situations. I'm dealing with something now. We had somebody ejected in a lacrosse game. Parents are upset. I'm dealing with the state association. They're wanting to know why they got suspended, but a lot of things. So I'm trying to mentor parents along, like rules and regulations, my staff. And I've also been asked a lot to mentor a lot of young athletic directors by some head of schools across probably the state of South Carolina, Virginia, and North Carolina that have asked me to come speak to their program. Because being a young AD, I tell them there's certain things you have to be. You have to be extremely organized. You got to be resilient at returning phone calls, emails, and texts. You got to be organized. You got to have a respect from the people, and you got to be able to be available, period. And I say, if you're not willing to do those things, family comes first, no doubt. But you're not going to succeed in the long haul because you're going to develop a reputation of being a guy it's hard to get up with or a girl, hard to be able to communicate, hard to schedule with, making sure that the team show up on time officially. So I've done a lot of mentoring. That George Whitfield thing that I was fortunate enough to get, that had to do with athletic administration. And I actually stuck my toe into the public school sector a lot. So I've been asked to do a lot of those, speak at a lot of things, communicate with a lot of people. I can't do all of them, but I do because I'm not coaching anymore. Travel to watch our teams play a lot and do a little bit more of that mentoring.
Yeah. Well, Coach, I know you probably are short of time here, but I wanted to ask one more question about your AD work. Do you find one thing Anna said is that the ADs are at each other's throats sometimes. They're not always the most collaborative group. Did you find that the case also in North Carolina, that the athletic directors are fighting and it's about turf sometimes?
But we're part of the North Carolina Independent Schools Athletic Association based out of Concord. And when I first was there, I was on the board for years. We were probably only had maybe 60 private schools in the state of North Carolina. We have over 100 now. And we have a state director. Then we have a local conference here, which is the Triangle Independent Schools Athletics. So I'm the president of that conference. I've been on the boards. I've been on a lot of stuff. I don't see that. I don't see any negative interaction among ADs. Matter of fact, I find it to be extremely collaborative. And again, I go back, I think we have a great relationship with our personal conference, which is 6 schools. That's changed because we used to be in a conference in Greensboro and High Point, which was tremendous travel. But some of these schools have just come about, Cary Academy, North Raleigh in the last 10, 15 years. But I think across the state, we just hosted a state basketball tournament back in February. That's 4 divisions coming into town. Let me tell you something, if I'm right on this, out of 25 basketball teams this year, 16 were private schools in the state of North Carolina. So we saw the best of the bunch here, and all the ADs, all the administration, and because we have the facilities to be able to put on a pretty good show, but we also have a collaborative opportunity for everybody to interact. And I see good, a good change of communication conversation. We also have a meeting in June up to Charlotte Speedway, actually, where all of them are expected to be there, all the trainers, all the ADs. I don't see anything but tremendous interaction, positive exchanges and high fives and congratulations. So I don't see that unless I'm missing something. Yeah. So I think we have a good bunch of ADs. We have a lot of young ADs, mentor them. I think we all have a good perspective what our responsibilities is to our individual institutions.
Well, Richmond could be a different a beast, Coach. Last question. Now that you stepped away for a year or so, do you like where football is now? The way the game is played now. When I played for Robinson, we ran the wing T. The passing games weren't very complicated. Now, when you go watch a high school game, you may have a complete spread offense and a shotgun, no huddle. The passing game is very high level. Do you like where the high school football game is now?
Well, when I first started coach, I coached what I knew. I knew the power game, the power run game, the eye, power blocking. That's why Mike McGee was. He was a hard nose. We're going to run it down your throat. And played a base defense at 5-3 because you didn't see passing much. And then obviously I had to evolve over time and move on with the offensive change, went to more spread stuff, more speed game, more getting people in spaces, which then changed the dynamics of defense. But you had to go more cover 2, cover 4, where you're playing the perimeter. Again, we talked about speed, different blocking techniques on the offensive line. Recently, different blocking techniques tackling techniques for safety. So if you didn't evolve with the game that I did through decades and you were determined, now, to be honest, I still had a fullback in my offense. I still had a tight end. If I got inside the 10-yard line, I'm going to run it down your throat because we're going to get into full house backfield. We rep that every day, perfect plays. And pretty much every time we would score. That's what we did. We developed that mentality of if we get inside that red zone, we're going to put it in the end zone, even if we had to get a first down out in the field. But we also would empty the backfield. We go to a spread offense. Our kids wanted to do that. They enjoyed it. And I was able to recruit some basketball players who wanted to get involved with that. I would go to the gym and say in the summer, hey, come play. I want to play football. Oh man, it's like basketball on grass. Let's go. And they actually enjoyed it. They had a big time catching passes and defending people. It's like playing man-to-man coverage. Let's go. So we were able to get some of those kids out there to do that. So I think the evolution, it comes and goes. I see the pro level, they're still using H-backs and tight ends. Some of the colleges do, some of them don't. It just depends what your background and philosophy. The gentleman I turned the program over to, who was an assistant me 10 years, coached at many colleges, was at Westminster Big Private School in Georgia. He's got a different approach to the game than I did, and he should. He adopted a lot of my principles, fundamentals, some of the things like that. But I told him, you need to be yourself. Don't try to do what I did. Terminology-wise, we ran plays from line of scrimmage. We had an audible system. We could run every play without even huddling. And he's changed a little bit of his stuff. But I said the principles of what you need to do in football, Graham, I have to say the same. Locker room decorum, discipline, expectation, and how your kids play the game. So, you got to go with the flow, and that's what we developed here.
Yeah. Well, Coach, this has been great. You've had quite a life, quite a career. You've done a little bit of everything and such an amazing accomplishments as a coach and a leader. I mean, it's just wonderful. I'm so thankful to Bruce a million for the idea of coaching. You were a little bit before my time, so I never saw you play, but I'm really happy that you came on and talked to me. This has been a blast, and learned so much. So yeah, I want to thank you for doing this, and hopefully we can keep in touch.
Well, listen, I really appreciate you taking time and reaching out to me down here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I appreciate what you're doing for Northern Virginia High Athletics, getting people involved. A lot of names, you and I know the same people, which is interesting. So, this age right now, I'm just continuing to just stay in the business. And, there's going to be an end game here soon. As I mentioned, we're transitioning to a new head of school coming out of Georgia. And, kind of made it through 5 of them. We'll see if I can make it through a 6th there. I do appreciate it. I hope you keep in touch with me and enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, sure will. If I'm ever in the Research Triangle, I'll definitely try to track you down and buy you a coffee.
Sounds like a plan. Thanks a lot.
Okay, Coach. Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Take care.